When Marcus Chen bought the abandoned cliff cabin for 50 cents at a county auction, everyone called him crazy. A single father working 2 jobs just to pay rent, spending his last dollar on a crumbling structure that clung to a rocky ledge like a bird's nest, seemed like desperation, not investment. The cabin had been empty for decades, its windows broken and roof caving in, accessible only by a treacherous mountain trail that kept most people away. But Marcus saw potential where others saw ruin. He planned to restore it as a simple home for himself and his 8-year-old daughter Emma, away from the city noise and closer to the hiking trails they both loved. What he didn't expect was what lay hidden beneath layers of dust and debris, a secret chamber carved into the living rock itself, but what was inside that chamber that made this experienced hiker collapse in shock. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen stared at the eviction notice taped to his apartment door, the red letters swimming before his tired eyes. 30 days, after working double shifts at the warehouse and weekend maintenance jobs, he still couldn't scrape together enough for rent in Denver's inflated housing market. His calloused hands trembled as he crumpled the paper, shoving it deep into his jacket pocket before 8-year-old Emma could see it. "Daddy, look what I made at school today," Emma called from the kitchen table, her voice bright with the innocent enthusiasm that both broke and mended his heart daily. She held up a hand-drawn map, carefully colored with crayons that were worn down to nubs. "It's our adventure map. See, here's our apartment, and here's where we go hiking on Sundays, and this," she pointed to a small rectangle perched on what looked like a mountain. "This is where we're going to live someday. Our own house where we can see the whole world." Marcus sat beside his daughter, studying her artwork with the careful attention he gave to everything Emma created. The map showed their cramped 2-bedroom apartment, connected by a winding trail to various hiking spots they'd explored together, and finally leading to her imagined dream house, complete with stick-figure versions of themselves standing on what appeared to be a cliff. "Tell me about this house, sweetheart," he said, grateful for any distraction from the financial reality pressing against his chest like a weight. "It's got big windows so we can watch the sunrise, and a porch where we can drink hot chocolate when it snows, and oh, a garden where I can grow those purple flowers we saw on Bridal Veil Falls Trail." Emma's dark eyes sparkled with the kind of hope that made Marcus want to believe impossible things were possible. That evening, after Emma fell asleep clutching her map, Marcus spread his bills across the kitchen table like a losing poker hand. Rent, utilities, car payment, groceries, Emma's after-school care, the numbers never balanced, no matter how he rearranged them. His warehouse supervisor had mentioned possible overtime, but even with extra hours, he was treading water in an ocean that kept getting deeper. The newspaper lay folded beside his coffee mug, and Marcus flipped through it without enthusiasm, scanning rental listings he couldn't afford and job opportunities that required qualifications he didn't possess. Then, buried on page 7 between a lawnmower sale and a state jewelry auction, a small advertisement caught his attention. "County property auction, Saturday 10 a.m. Various parcels, including mountain properties. Mountain properties." Marcus thought of Emma's map, her dream house perched impossibly on a cliff. He'd attended one county auction years ago with his father, before Emma was born, before his ex-wife left them both for a life that didn't include the complications of an unplanned pregnancy, and a man who measured success in hiking miles rather than salary increases. Saturday morning found Marcus and Emma dressed in their best clothes, his only dress shirt and her favorite unicorn sweater, standing in the county courthouse parking lot among a crowd of serious-looking bidders with clipboards and expensive vehicles. Emma clutched her adventure map, convinced they were embarking on the kind of quest that belonged in the fairy tales he read to her each night. Lot 47, the auctioneer called. Remote cabin property, approximately 1,200 square feet, mountain access via hiking trail only, property sold as is, no utilities, structural condition unknown. Marcus studied the grainy photograph passed around the crowd. A small cabin clung to what appeared to be a rocky outcrop, accessible only by a narrow trail visible in the image. Other bidders examined the photo and shook their heads, muttering about liability issues and impractical access. One man laughed outright, calling it a lawsuit waiting to happen, but Emma's eyes went wide with recognition. "Daddy, it looks just like my map house." The bidding opened at $5. Marcus raised his hand before his rational mind could intervene. $10, $15, $25. The other bidders dropped out quickly, apparently unwilling to waste money on what one woman called an expensive camping trip with property taxes. Going once at 50 cents, the auctioneer called, scanning the crowd for additional bids. Going twice, Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. 50 cents, less than a cup of coffee, less than Emma's weekly allowance, his last chance to give his daughter something that resembled the dream she'd drawn in crayon. Sold to bidder 23 for 50 cents. The auction receipt felt impossibly light in Marcus's hands, but Emma's delighted squeal as she hugged his leg made him feel for the first moment in months like maybe he'd made the right choice. The trail to their new property began innocently enough, a gravel road that deteriorated into packed dirt, then into something that barely qualified as a path. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his aging Honda as it bounced over rocks and ruts that threatened to bottom out his already struggling suspension. Emma sat beside him, her adventure map pressed against the passenger window, comparing her crayon creation to the rugged landscape unfolding before them. "Are we there yet?" she asked for the fourth time, her excitement undimmed by the increasingly challenging terrain. "Almost, sweetheart. We'll have to walk the last part." Marcus tried to keep the uncertainty out of his voice as he parked where the road simply ended, marked only by a rusty sign that read, "Trail access, hikers only beyond this point." They shouldered their day packs and began the ascent on a narrow trail that switchbacked up the mountainside through dense pine forest. The morning air carried the crisp bite of altitude and the green scent of evergreen needles. Emma bounded ahead with the effortless energy of childhood, stopping frequently to examine interesting rocks or collect pine cones for her nature collection. "Daddy, look how high we are already." She stood on a rocky outcrop, gesturing toward the valley spread below them like a patchwork quilt of fields and roads. "We're like eagles up here." Marcus paused beside her, breathing hard from the climb and the weight of what they might find at trail's end. The view was undeniably spectacular, but the isolation felt overwhelming. No power lines, no road access, no neighbors visible in any direction. What had seemed like an adventure in the county courthouse now felt like a monumental mistake. After another hour of steady climbing, the cabin finally came into view. Marcus's first glimpse made his stomach drop. The structure perched on a narrow ledge of rock, like something from a fairy tale, if fairy tales included collapsing roofs and broken windows. Weather-stained cedar siding had warped and split, and what remained of the front porch tilted at an alarming angle. "It's perfect," Emma exclaimed, racing ahead before Marcus could stop her. "Just like my map. Look, Daddy, you can see everything from here." She wasn't wrong about the view. The cabin's location offered a panoramic vista of the entire valley, with mountains stretching to the horizon in every direction. But the building itself looked like it might slide off the cliff with the next strong wind. Marcus approached cautiously, testing each floorboard of the sagging porch before trusting it with his weight. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, and he had to lift it to swing it open. Inside, debris covered everything, fallen plaster, broken glass, and decades of accumulated leaves and dust. "Can we clean it up today?" Emma asked, already envisioning the cozy home this wreck might become. "Sweetheart, this is going to take a lot more than cleaning." Marcus surveyed the damage with growing dismay. Water stains on the ceiling indicated roof leaks, the floorboards sagged ominously in places, and daylight showed through gaps in the walls. The stone fireplace appeared intact, which was encouraging, but the rest of the structure looked like it needed complete reconstruction. Emma explored fearlessly while Marcus mentally calculated the cost of materials, tools, and weekend after weekend of work to make this place remotely habitable. Even if he could somehow manage the restoration, how would they handle emergencies up here? What about Emma's school, his work schedule, basic necessities like water and electricity? "Daddy, I found something." Emma's voice echoed from what appeared to be a back bedroom. "There's papers hidden in this crack." Marcus found her kneeling beside a section of damaged wall where water damage had opened a gap between the boards. She'd extracted what looked like an old surveyor's map, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. "Be careful with that, Em. It looks really old." He knelt beside her to examine the document. The faded printing showed their property marked as Blackwood Mining Station, Copper Claims 1920. If this property had been a mining operation, that might explain the cabin's remote location and the trail access, but it also raised new questions about what else might be hidden in these mountains. As they prepared to head back down the trail, Marcus took one last look at their 50-cent investment. The practical part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that he'd made a terrible mistake. But watching Emma's face as she gazed out over the spectacular view, he couldn't bring himself to crush her excitement with adult pessimism. Maybe impossible things were worth attempting, even if they scared him. The Millfield Public Library occupied a century-old brick building that smelled of aged paper and quiet wisdom. Marcus pushed through the heavy oak doors with Emma close behind, the old survey map carefully tucked in a manila folder under his arm. He'd spent the entire week thinking about their mountain property, alternating between excitement and dread as he mentally tallied the restoration challenges ahead. "Can I help you folks?" The voice belonged to an elderly woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified kind blue eyes. Her nameplate read, "Mrs. Patterson, Head Librarian." "We're hoping to research some local history," Marcus explained. "We just bought property up on Ridge Mountain, and we found this old survey map. I'm trying to learn more about the area's background." Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent decades helping people unlock the stories hidden in dusty archives. "Ridge Mountain. Now that takes me back. Let me see what you found." Marcus spread the survey map on a reading table while Emma explored the children's section nearby. Mrs. Patterson studied the document with the careful attention of someone who understood the value of historical documents. "Oh my," she whispered, adjusting her glasses. "This is from the Blackwood operation. I haven't seen documentation from that mine in probably 30 years. She looked up at Marcus with renewed interest. "You said you bought property up there? The old cabin?" "The cabin, yes, for 50 cents at a county auction. I'm beginning to understand why nobody else wanted it." Mrs. Patterson chuckled softly. "Well, there might be more to that story than you realize. Follow me to our local history section. I think you'll find the Blackwood mine quite fascinating." She led them to a corner of the library where tall shelves held bound volumes of local newspapers, historical society publications, and boxes of archived photographs. Mrs. Patterson pulled several volumes from the shelves with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly where to find buried treasures. "Theodore Blackwood arrived in 1919, she began, opening a photo album to a black-and-white image of a stern-faced man in a dark suit, standing beside mining equipment. "Came from back east with enough money to purchase mineral rights to half the mountain. The copper operation he established was quite successful for several years." Emma wandered over, drawn by the old photographs. "He looks serious," she observed, studying Blackwood's formal portrait. "He was a private man," Mrs. Patterson agreed. "Kept to himself mostly, though he employed a dozen local men at the height of operations. Built that cabin as his residence and mining office. Some say he was eccentric, but nobody questioned his mining expertise." She turned the pages to reveal newspaper clippings from the early 1920s. Headlines proclaimed, "Blackwood Mine yields record copper deposits, and local operation expands production." Marcus read over her shoulder, learning about the prosperity the mine had brought to the small community. "What happened to shut it down?" Marcus asked, noting that the articles seemed to stop abruptly in 1924. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew more serious. "That's where the story gets interesting and tragic." She pulled out a newspaper dated September 15, 1924. The headline read, "Cave-in at Blackwood Mine kills 3 workers." The article described a devastating collapse in the main shaft that trapped and killed 3 miners. Marcus read the details with growing sympathy for families who'd lost fathers and brothers to the dangerous work of extracting wealth from the mountain's depths. "The mine closed immediately after the accident," Mrs. Patterson continued. "But here's the mysterious part. Theodore Blackwood disappeared the same night, along with 3 months' worth of payroll money. Some said he fled in guilt over the safety conditions. Others suspected he'd been planning to leave anyway and used the accident as cover." "He stole the payroll?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old sense of justice clearly offended. Nobody knows for certain, dear. He was never found, and neither was the money. The mine property was eventually seized for unpaid taxes, and it's been essentially abandoned ever since. Mrs. Patterson showed them additional photographs, the mining operation at its peak, the sealed mine entrance after the accident, and a few shots of the cabin in its original condition. Marcus was struck by how solid and well-built the structure had been before decades of weather and neglect took their toll. There were always rumors, Mrs. Patterson added, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence. Some of the old-timers claimed Blackwood had hidden something valuable up there before he vanished. Treasure hunters have explored those mountains for decades, but the terrain is so treacherous that most give up quickly. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson handed Marcus a manila envelope. Photocopies of everything we looked at today, and here, she reached under the counter and produced a rusty pickaxe head, its metal surface pitted with age. This was donated to our historical collection years ago. Found it up near your cabin site. Thought you might like to have it, given your connection to the property. Marcus hefted the mining tool, feeling the weight of history in its worn metal. Emma traced the tool's weathered surface with fascination, clearly imagining the miners who'd once wielded it in the mountain's depths. Walking back to their car, Marcus's mind raced with new questions. Had Theodore Blackwood really stolen the payroll, or was there another explanation for his disappearance? And what secrets might still be hidden in the mountain where their 50-cent cabin waited for restoration? Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the mountain trail treacherous, and Marcus questioned his sanity for attempting restoration work. But Emma's enthusiasm proved infectious, and by 8 a.m. they were loading his Honda with basic tools, cleaning supplies and sandwiches for what promised to be a long day of labor. "Remember, we're just clearing debris today," Marcus reminded his daughter as they began the familiar hike up the mountain trail. "Nothing dangerous, and stay where I can see you." "I know, Daddy, but can we look for more treasure like that map?" Emma skipped ahead, her rain jacket bright yellow against the muted colors of the wet forest. The cabin looked even more forlorn in the gray morning light, but Marcus tried to focus on potential rather than problems. He'd spent the week researching restoration techniques online and watching YouTube videos about log cabin repair. The project felt overwhelming, but every expert emphasized the same advice: start with one small area and build momentum. They began in what had once been the main living space, clearing out decades of accumulated debris. Emma proved surprisingly helpful, carefully sorting items they found into piles, obvious trash, potentially useful materials, and things that looked historically interesting. Her natural curiosity turned the tedious work into a treasure hunt. "What do you think this was?" she asked, holding up a bent piece of metal that might once have been a cooking utensil. "Probably part of an old pot or pan," Marcus guessed, grateful for any distraction from the overwhelming scope of repairs needed. The miners would have cooked their own meals up here. As they worked their way through the debris, a pattern emerged. Beneath the obvious damage from weather and neglect lay evidence of a once comfortable home. The stone fireplace had been carefully crafted, with intricate stonework that spoke of skilled craftsmanship. Built-in shelving along one wall remained structurally sound despite superficial damage. "Daddy, there's something weird about this wall," Emma called from near the fireplace. "It sounds different when I knock on it." Marcus joined her investigation, tapping the wooden panels that formed the wall's lower section. Emma was right. One section produced a distinctly hollow sound compared to the solid thunks elsewhere. Water damage had warped the wood, creating gaps that revealed the wall was actually double-layered. "Help me clear this debris away," Marcus said, his curiosity overriding his caution about structural safety. Together they removed chunks of fallen plaster and broken wood until the hollow section was fully exposed. Behind a loose panel, Marcus discovered a narrow cavity containing something wrapped in oiled cloth. His hands trembled as he carefully extracted a leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age, but remarkably well preserved. "What is it?" Emma pressed close, her eyes wide with excitement. Marcus opened the journal carefully, revealing page after page of handwritten entries in faded but legible ink. The inside cover bore an inscription: "Property of Theodore Blackwood, Private Journal, 1922-1924. It's Blackwood's diary," Marcus breathed, hardly believing their luck. "Emma, this could tell us everything about what happened here." They sat together on the cleanest section of floor while Marcus read aloud from the journal's early entries. Blackwood's writing revealed a man deeply committed to his mining operation, but increasingly troubled by strange discoveries in the mountain's depths. July 15, 1922. The new shaft has revealed copper veins beyond our initial estimates, but there are older workings here, much older, tunnels that predate any recorded mining claims. Someone was here long before us, and they knew something we don't. Emma listened with rapt attention as Marcus continued reading. Blackwood's entries grew more cryptic as the months progressed, mentioning visitors in the night and cargo that must reach its destination safely. September 3, 1923. The chamber is nearly complete. Few suspect its true purpose, and fewer still would approve if they knew. But sometimes a man must choose between law and justice, between profit and principle. The work we do here serves a higher calling than copper extraction. What chamber? Emma asked, her young mind grasping the mystery before Marcus fully understood its implications. Marcus flipped toward the journal's final entries, finding increasingly urgent tone in Blackwood's writing. The last entry, dated just days before the mine accident, sent chills down his spine. The authorities grow suspicious and time grows short. If discovery comes, the chamber knows its secrets well. The key lies below, where honest work meets sacred purpose. May those who follow understand what we have tried to accomplish in this lonely place. Daddy, what does that mean? What chamber? What key? Marcus closed the journal carefully, his mind racing with possibilities. Blackwood hadn't just been a mine owner. He'd been involved in something secret, something that required hidden chambers and mysterious visitors. The missing payroll might not have been theft at all, but payment for services that couldn't be openly acknowledged. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I think Theodore Blackwood was hiding something much more important than copper mining equipment. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Marcus found himself looking at their restoration project with new eyes. They weren't just repairing a building, they might be uncovering a piece of hidden history that someone had risked everything to protect. The journal's cryptic references to chambers and keys suggested their 50-cent purchase had come with secrets that its previous owner never intended to abandon. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted Marcus's solitary work on the cabin's damaged roof. He looked down from his precarious perch to see a battered pickup truck navigating the last section of trail that most vehicles couldn't handle. A man in work clothes climbed out, surveying the cabin with the practiced eye of someone who understood construction challenges. "You must be the fellow who bought this place," the stranger called up. "I'm Jake Morrison. Live about 3 miles down the mountain. Heard through the grapevine that someone was crazy enough to take on Blackwood's old place." Marcus climbed down carefully, grateful for the interruption. Working alone on structural repairs was both dangerous and inefficient, but his budget couldn't accommodate hiring professional help. "Marcus Chen," he replied, extending a hand. "And yes, I'm probably crazy, though my daughter prefers the term adventurous." Jake's weathered face broke into a grin. "Kids have a way of seeing possibilities where adults see problems. Mind if I take a look around? I've been curious about this place for 40 years." As they walked through the cabin, Jake's commentary proved invaluable. His grandfather had worked construction in the area during the 1920s, and Jake had inherited both his tools and his knowledge of traditional building techniques. "Your foundation is solid," Jake observed, testing the stonework with his boot. "Blackwood built to last, even if he didn't plan on staying. But you're going to need help with that roof before the next heavy snow." "I appreciate the assessment, but I'm working on a pretty tight budget," Marcus admitted. "Actually, no budget at all, just sweat equity and determination. Well, I'm retired and bored, and my wife keeps finding projects around the house to keep me busy. Maybe we could work out a trade. I help you with the technical stuff, you help me avoid painting the guest bedroom." Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with gratitude. Working alone, the restoration could take years. With experienced help, it might actually be achievable. Emma emerged from her exploration of the back rooms, her arms full of cleaning supplies and her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, I found something by the fireplace." She held up an ornate iron key, its metal dark with age and its design unlike anything Marcus had seen in modern hardware stores. The key's head was elaborately decorated with symbols that looked almost ceremonial, and its shaft was longer than typical house keys. Jake whistled low when he saw it. Now that's interesting. My grandfather mentioned keys like that. Your grandfather. Marcus took the key from Emma, feeling its substantial weight. He helped with some of the construction up here. Always said Blackwood was secretive about certain parts of the building. Had the men work in shifts so nobody saw the complete project. My grandfather noticed some unusual features, thicker walls in certain areas, stonework that didn't match the rest of the cabin. Emma bounced with excitement. Just like in Blackwood's journal, he wrote about chambers and secrets. Jake's expression sharpened with interest. You found Blackwood's journal. Marcus retrieved the leather-bound book from where he'd carefully stored it, sharing some of the more intriguing entries with Jake. The older man listened with growing fascination, occasionally nodding, as if pieces of a long-standing puzzle were falling into place. That explains some of the stories my grandfather told, Jake said thoughtfully. He always suspected Blackwood was involved in something beyond mining. Too many visitors for such a remote operation, and they didn't look like copper buyers. What kind of visitors? Marcus asked. Families mostly, groups traveling at night, staying only briefly before moving on. My grandfather figured they were relatives visiting workers, but the timing never made sense. They'd arrive during the new moon, when travel would be most dangerous. Emma held the ornate key up to the light, studying its intricate design. Do you think it opens something secret? Jake knelt beside her, examining the key more closely. The metalwork is hand-forged, probably custom-made. See these symbols on the head? They're not decorative, they're functional. This key was designed to open something specific, something important enough to justify commissioning custom hardware. As they prepared to leave for the day, Jake's truck loaded with tools he'd volunteered to bring for their next work session, Marcus felt his perspective on the project shifting. What had begun as a desperate housing solution was becoming something more complex, a historical mystery that connected him to stories larger than his own immediate needs. Jake, what do you really think Blackwood was doing up here? Marcus asked as they secured the cabin for the night. Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the valley spread below them. My grandfather had theories he never shared publicly, said some truths were too dangerous for casual conversation, even decades later. But he believed Blackwood was a good man caught in impossible circumstances, trying to do right by people who had nowhere else to turn. As they hiked down the mountain trail in the fading light, Emma clutched the mysterious key like a talisman, her imagination already spinning stories about secret doors and hidden treasures. Marcus found himself hoping that whatever secrets Theodore Blackwood had left behind, they would prove worthy of the courage it had taken to keep them. The ornate key seemed to burn in Marcus's pocket as he and Jake examined every visible lock and mechanism in the cabin. They'd spent hours checking doors, windows, and even an old trunk they'd found in what used to be the bedroom, but nothing matched the key's elaborate design. It's got to open something, Emma insisted, holding Blackwood's journal open to the page where he'd written about the key lies below. He wouldn't have made such a fancy key for nothing. Jake ran his hands along the stone fireplace, his experienced fingers probing for irregularities in the masonry. Your daughter's right. Custom metalwork like this wasn't cheap. Even in the 1920s, Blackwood commissioned this key for something he considered very important. Marcus knelt beside the fireplace's hearth, studying the stone pattern more carefully. The craftsmanship was exceptional, with each stone fitted precisely to its neighbors. But as he traced the mortar lines, he noticed something odd. One section of stones at the base appeared slightly different, as if they'd been removed and reset. Jake, look at this. Does this stonework look different to you? Jake crouched beside him, running calloused fingers over the questionable area. You're right. These stones have been disturbed. See how the mortar is slightly different color. Someone took this section apart and put it back together. Emma pressed close, her excitement building. Maybe there's a secret door. Easy there, Indiana Jones, Marcus cautioned, though his own pulse was accelerating. Even if there is something behind here, we need to be careful. Old buildings can be dangerous. Jake retrieved a crowbar from his toolkit and began carefully probing the mortar around the suspicious stones. After several minutes of patient work, he managed to loosen one of the larger pieces. Behind it, instead of solid foundation, was darkness. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake breathed. "There's definitely a space back here." Working together, they carefully removed enough stones to reveal a narrow opening, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air flowed from the gap, carrying scents of earth and stone that suggested a substantial cavity beyond. Marcus shone his flashlight into the opening, revealing what appeared to be a carved passage leading into the mountain itself. The walls showed tool marks from careful excavation, and the floor was paved with flat stones that created a level walking surface. "Daddy, can we go in?" Emma asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "Absolutely not," Marcus replied firmly. "We don't know how stable it is or what might be down there. We need to think about this carefully." But even as he spoke, Marcus felt the pull of discovery tugging at his rational caution. The passage clearly led somewhere significant. Blackwood wouldn't have invested such effort in creating a hidden entrance to nowhere. Jake aimed his own flashlight into the opening, trying to see beyond the first bend in the passage. The construction looked solid. Whoever carved this knew what they were doing, but Marcus is right. We should proceed cautiously. As they examined the hidden entrance more closely, Emma noticed something they'd missed. Above the opening, carved directly into the stone lintel, were symbols that didn't match any Native American petroglyphs Marcus had seen in his hiking adventures. "Look at these marks," Emma said, tracing the carved symbols with her finger. "They're like the ones on the key." Marcus compared the key's decorative elements to the stone carvings and felt his breath catch. The symbols were indeed similar. Not identical, but clearly related, as if they'd been created by the same hand, or for the same purpose. "It's a lock and key system," Jake realized, "but not mechanical, symbolic. The carvings above the entrance and the ones on the key, they're meant to identify who has legitimate access." "Like a password?" Emma asked. "More like a badge of authority," Jake explained. "Someone carrying this key would be recognized as having permission to enter, even if guards or watchers were present." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Whatever lay beyond this hidden entrance had been important enough for Blackwood to risk everything protecting it. The missing mine workers, the mysterious nighttime visitors, the stolen payroll, it all suddenly felt connected to this secret passage. "We need more light, better equipment, and probably someone with more experience than we have," Marcus said, though every instinct urged him to explore immediately. "Agreed," Jake nodded. "But Marcus, we also need to decide who else we tell about this. If word gets out that there's something hidden up here, you'll have treasure hunters crawling all over your property." Emma looked back and forth between the adults, sensing the gravity of their discovery, even if she didn't fully understand its implications. "It's our secret, right? Just us." Marcus looked at his daughter's trusting face, then at the mysterious entrance that promised answers to questions they were only beginning to understand. Tomorrow they would need to make decisions about how to proceed, but tonight the secret belonged to them alone. Whatever Theodore Blackwood had hidden behind this carefully concealed entrance, it had waited nearly a century for discovery. It could wait one more night while they planned their next move carefully. Armed with heavy-duty flashlights, rope and first aid supplies, Marcus led the way through the hidden entrance. The passage was wider than it had appeared from outside, carved with obvious skill through solid rock. Every few feet, small alcoves held the remnants of oil lamps, evidence that this route had once been regularly traveled. "Stay close behind me, Em," Marcus called over his shoulder, his voice echoing oddly in the confined space. "This is the best adventure ever," Emma whispered, her excitement barely contained despite the serious atmosphere. The passage curved gently downward for about 50 feet, before opening into a chamber that made Marcus stop abruptly, causing Emma to bump into his back. Jake's sharp intake of breath behind them confirmed that they were all seeing the same impossible sight. The chamber was roughly circular, about 20 feet across, with a domed ceiling that had been smoothed and carved with incredible precision. But it wasn't the craftsmanship that took their breath away, it was the purpose the room had clearly served. Along the walls, wooden benches sat at regular intervals, worn smooth by countless people who had waited here. A simple wooden cross hung on the far wall, flanked by faded paintings that depicted scenes Marcus recognized from his childhood Sunday school classes. Moses leading people out of bondage, Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, scenes of refuge and rescue. In the center of the chamber sat a heavy wooden table, and on that table lay an object that made everything suddenly, heartbreakingly clear, a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with names, dates, and destinations written in multiple hands. "Oh my God," Jake breathed, understanding flooding his voice. "It's a station." Marcus opened the ledger with trembling hands, reading entries that transported him back to one of the darkest chapters in American history. July 14, 1922. Samuel Washington, age 34, wife Martha, children Joseph 12, Mary 8, Rebecca 5, from Alabama plantation, bound for Detroit, fed and rested 3 days, provided warm clothes and $10 for train passage. August 3, 1922, elderly woman calling herself Grandmother Rose, no other name given, traveling alone from Mississippi, injured foot treated, stayed 1 week until healing, left blessing for Mr. Blackwood's kindness. Page after page contained similar entries, families fleeing slavery's aftermath, individuals seeking freedom and opportunity in the North, all finding temporary sanctuary in this hidden chamber carved into a Colorado mountain. Emma read over his shoulder, her young mind struggling to process the human stories contained in the ledger's careful entries. "Daddy, why were these people hiding?" Marcus knelt beside his daughter, choosing his words carefully. "A long time ago, Emma, some people in our country weren't treated fairly because of the color of their skin. These brave families were traveling to places where they could be free and safe, but the journey was dangerous. People like Theodore Blackwood helped them by providing secret places to rest, like a superhero hideout, exactly like that, sweetheart. Secret heroes helping people who needed protection." Jake explored the chamber's other features while Marcus continued reading the ledger. In one alcove, they found carefully preserved supplies, blankets, canned goods, medical supplies, and clothing in various sizes. Another alcove contained children's toys and books, evidence of Blackwood's understanding that entire families traveled these dangerous routes. "Marcus, look at this," Jake called from near the chamber's far wall. He'd discovered a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. "There's more." They followed this second passage for another 30 feet before emerging into a smaller chamber that served a different purpose entirely. Here wooden crates were stacked along the walls, and when Marcus pried one open, he found it filled with something that explained the mystery of the missing mine payroll. Gold coins, carefully wrapped and preserved, but these weren't stolen funds, they were donations. A document preserved in waterproof wrapping explained Blackwood's system. The mine provided legitimate cover for the Underground Railroad station, while sympathetic supporters from Denver and other cities contributed funds to support the operation. The missing payroll wasn't theft, Marcus realized. It was the final withdrawal to fund safe passage for families who were already in transit when the mine accident happened. Emma discovered one more treasure in the supply chamber, a tin box containing letters written by people who had passed through the station. Letter after letter expressed gratitude for Blackwood's courage, updates on successful journeys, and news of new lives built in freedom. Reading these personal accounts, Marcus felt the weight of history pressing against his chest. They hadn't just discovered a building, they'd found evidence of a secret network that had saved lives during one of America's most turbulent periods. "Jake, we're not just restoring a cabin anymore," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're guardians of something much more important." Looking around the chamber where dozens of families had found temporary refuge nearly a century ago, Marcus understood that their 50-cent purchase had made them stewards of a legacy that deserved protection and remembrance. The mountain had kept Blackwood's secret for almost 100 years, waiting for people who would understand its significance. Back in the supply chamber, Marcus carefully extracted the tin box of letters while Emma held the flashlight steady. The metal container felt substantial in his hands, worn smooth by frequent handling. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were dozens of folded papers, some formal letters written on good stationery, others hastily scrawled notes on whatever paper was available. "Can you read them to us, Daddy?" Emma asked, settling beside him on one of the wooden benches. Marcus unfolded the first letter, its careful handwriting still legible despite the decades. This one's dated December 1922. "Dear Mr. Blackwood, we have arrived safely in Chicago and found work at the steel mill. My oldest son has started school and reads well. We will never forget your kindness during our darkest hour. May God bless you for the risks you took to help strangers. Your friend always, Samuel Washington. Jake listened quietly as Marcus read more letters, each one revealing personal stories of courage, gratitude, and new beginnings. The correspondence painted a picture of Blackwood's network extending far beyond the Colorado mountains, connecting desperate families to opportunities throughout the northern states. Emma picked up another letter, sounding out words carefully. This one says, "Mr. Blackwood, my grandmother Rose told me about the mountain angel who helped her when her foot was hurt. She said you gave her medicine and food and never asked for anything back. I am writing to tell you she made it to Detroit and lived with us until she passed peacefully last winter. She talked about you often and said prayers for your safety every night." Marcus felt tears threatening as his daughter's innocent voice brought these historical testimonies to life. Each letter represented not just successful escapes, but entire families whose descendants might never know how close their ancestors had come to capture or death on the dangerous journey north. In the bottom of the tin box, wrapped separately, they found something that made Marcus's breath catch, a small cache of gold coins, but not the mining fortune he might have expected. Instead, a note explained their significance: emergency fund for families caught without resources, use only when all other options exhausted, till PP. Even after he disappeared, he was still trying to protect people, Jake observed, understanding the full scope of Blackwood's commitment to his secret mission. Marcus counted the coins carefully, enough to support several families for months, preserved against desperate need that never came. The money represented Blackwood's final act of faith in his cause, hidden where it could serve its intended purpose if the network continued operating after his departure. As they explored the chamber more thoroughly, additional discoveries revealed the sophistication of Blackwood's operation. A hand-drawn map showed safe routes through the mountain terrain, marked with symbols indicating water sources, shelter locations, and danger points. Supply lists detailed everything from medical supplies to children's clothing, organized with military precision. "Look at this," Emma called from a corner where she'd found something partially hidden behind stacked supplies. "It's a picture." The photograph showed a group of people standing in front of the cabin, but not the formal mining crew portraits Marcus had seen at the library. This image captured families, adults and children of various ages, some well-dressed, others in simple work clothes, all looking directly at the camera with expressions of hope and determination. On the photograph's back, in Blackwood's handwriting, "Friends departing for new lives, August 1923. May their journeys end in joy." Jake studied the faces in the photograph with fascination. "These are the people your chamber served, Marcus. Real families with real stories, not just names in a ledger." Marcus turned the photograph over again, studying each face and wondering about their individual stories. Had the elderly woman in the corner been Grandmother Rose? Was the young man holding a small child the same Samuel Washington, whose grateful letter they'd just read? "We have to tell people about this," Emma announced with 8-year-old certainty. These families were brave, and Mr. Blackwood was brave, and everyone should know their story. Marcus looked around the chamber that had preserved these stories for nearly a century, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Emma was right, this history deserved to be remembered and honored. But sharing their discovery would also mean losing the privacy and isolation that had made their restoration project feel manageable. "What do you think, Jake? Once word gets out about this, everything changes." Jake was quiet for a long moment, obviously weighing the implications. "My grandfather always said some stories are too important to keep secret forever. These families trusted Blackwood with their lives. Maybe it's time to trust the world with their memory." As they prepared to seal the chamber temporarily while they decided how to proceed, Marcus took one last look around the space where ordinary people had accomplished extraordinary acts of courage. The 50-cent cabin purchase had led them to something far more valuable than gold, a piece of American history that proved heroes sometimes worked in secret, asking for no recognition beyond the knowledge that they had helped others find freedom. Marcus's phone rang at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, jarring him from restless sleep filled with dreams of hidden chambers and historical secrets. The caller ID showed Millfield County Planning, and his stomach immediately tightened with apprehension. "Mr. Chen, this is David Rodriguez from the County Planning Office. We need to schedule a site visit to your Ridge Mountain property. There have been some irregularities flagged in our records." "What kind of irregularities?" Marcus asked, fully awake now and sensing trouble. Questions about the original auction parameters and property boundaries. Our legal department wants to verify that all procedures were followed correctly. Would this afternoon be convenient? Marcus agreed to the meeting while his mind raced through possible complications. Had someone challenged the auction, discovered he couldn't afford proper development of the land? He'd been meticulous about following all the legal requirements, but government bureaucracy had ways of finding problems where none had existed before. At the cabin that afternoon, Marcus met Rodriguez and two other officials, a surveyor and someone introduced as a development consultant. Their presence felt ominous as they examined the property with clipboards and measuring equipment. The cabin appears to be in better condition than our records indicated, Rodriguez observed, noting Marcus's restoration progress. Have you made substantial improvements, basic repairs to make it safe and weatherproof? Marcus replied carefully. Nothing that changes the fundamental structure. The development consultant, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, seemed less interested in the cabin than in the surrounding terrain. She spent considerable time studying sightlines and access routes, occasionally taking photographs with a Turan camera. Mr. Chen, are you aware that a development company has expressed interest in purchasing this entire mountain section for a luxury resort project? Rodriguez asked, his tone suggesting this was more than casual inquiry. Marcus felt his world shift slightly. No, I wasn't aware, but the property isn't for sale. Of course, that's your choice, Vance interjected smoothly. But Summit Peak Development has authorized me to present you with a very generous offer, far more than you paid at auction, certainly enough to purchase comparable property in a more accessible location. She handed him a folder containing documents that made his eyes widen. The offer was indeed generous enough to buy a house in town, pay off his debts, and still have substantial savings remaining. For a single father struggling financially, it represented security he'd never imagined possible. This seems like a lot of money for a remote cabin on a mountain, Marcus said, suspicion growing. What makes this location so valuable to a development company? Summit views, proximity to existing ski areas, potential for exclusive resort development, Vance explained with practiced efficiency. Remote mountain properties are increasingly valuable for high-end tourism ventures. But Marcus noticed she avoided eye contact when explaining the company's interest, and her surveyor companion seemed more focused on the mountain's internal structure than its scenic value. They were looking for something specific, and he doubted it had anything to do with resort development. Emma arrived from school as the officials were preparing to leave, her backpack bouncing as she ran up the trail. Marcus watched Vance's expression shift when she saw his daughter, her professional smile becoming slightly more predatory. Lovely child. Vance commented, I imagine maintaining a property this remote must be challenging for a single parent. Safety concerns, emergency access, educational opportunities, so many factors to consider when raising a child in isolation. The implicit threat in her words made Marcus's protective instincts flare. We managed just fine, thank you. After the officials left, Marcus found himself staring at the development company's offer, while Emma worked on homework at the cabin's newly repaired table. The money would solve every financial problem he faced, provide Emma with opportunities he could never afford otherwise, and eliminate the stress of maintaining a property that challenged his skills and resources daily. But it would also mean abandoning the Underground Railroad station to people who clearly had no interest in preserving its historical significance. The secret chamber that had protected families seeking freedom would become part of a luxury resort's basement, its stories buried beneath profit margins and tourist amenities. Daddy, you look worried, Emma observed, looking up from her math homework. Is everything okay? Marcus folded the offer documents and tucked them away. Just thinking about some decisions we might need to make, sweetheart. That evening, Marcus discovered one more piece of the puzzle in Blackwood's journal, a photograph tucked between the pages that he'd somehow missed before. The image showed Blackwood with his arm around a young woman of mixed race and two small children, all standing in front of the cabin. On the back, in Blackwood's handwriting, My family, the reason for everything, 1923. Suddenly, Blackwood's motivations became crystal clear. He hadn't been a distant philanthropist helping strangers. He'd been a man protecting people who looked like his own family, understanding personally what freedom meant, because those he loved needed the same refuge he provided to others. The photograph made Marcus's decision easier, even as it made his situation more complicated. Marcus arrived at the library Tuesday morning to find Mrs. Patterson waiting for him with an expression of barely contained excitement. Word of his discovery had spread through Jake's careful sharing with trusted locals, and the elderly librarian had spent the weekend researching connections between Blackwood's operation and documented Underground Railroad networks. "Marcus, you've uncovered something extraordinary," she said, spreading maps and documents across the reading table. "I've been corresponding with historians at 3 universities, and they're all fascinated by your findings." She pointed to a regional map, marked with red lines showing known Underground Railroad routes. "Look here, there's a documented gap in the network between Kansas and Denver. Historians have always wondered how families traveling west manage that dangerous stretch. Your station fills that missing piece perfectly." Emma studied the map with intense concentration, tracing the routes with her finger. "So families came all this way just to be free?" "They came much farther than this, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson explained gently. "Some walked hundreds of miles, traveling only at night, hiding during the day. People like your Theodore Blackwood risked everything to provide safe stopping places." Jake arrived carrying a wooden crate that he set carefully on the table. "Thought you might want to see this. Found it in my grandfather's things after our conversation yesterday." Inside the crate, wrapped in cloth, was a piece of fabric that made Mrs. Patterson gasp, a section of quilt bearing a distinctive pattern of stars and geometric shapes. "Oh my word," she breathed, "that's a signal quilt." Underground Railroad conductors used specific patterns to communicate with travelers. "This star pattern means safe house ahead." Marcus examined the quilt piece carefully, noting how its pattern matched designs they'd seen carved into the chamber walls. "Your grandfather kept this all these years. He said it was given to him by someone who worked with Blackwood, told him it was important to preserve, but never explained why. Now I understand. It's proof of the network's existence." Mrs. Patterson had more revelations. "I've also been researching the development company that approached you. Summit Peak Development is owned by Harrison Industries, a consortium with interests in mining and mineral extraction. They're not planning a resort, Marcus. They're after something in the mountain." "What could they be mining up there?" Emma asked. "Mr. Blackwood already took out all the copper, right?" "Not copper," Mrs. Patterson replied, consulting her research notes. "Modern geological surveys suggest rare earth minerals in that mountain range. Elements used in electronics and renewable energy technology. Very valuable and very profitable to extract." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. The development company's interest, the pressure from county officials, the generous buyout offer, none of it was about luxury resorts. They wanted to strip mine the mountain, and his property sat directly over the richest deposits. "If they mine the mountain, what happens to the Underground Railroad station?" Emma asked, already understanding the answer. "It gets destroyed," Marcus said quietly, "along with all the evidence of what happened there." Jake's expression hardened with determination. "Not if we can help it. Marcus, there are laws protecting historical sites. If we can get your discovery officially recognized, it might prevent any mining operations." Mrs. Patterson nodded enthusiastically. "I've contacted Dr. Marcus Chen at the State University's History Department. She specializes in Underground Railroad research and wants to visit immediately to authenticate your findings. Official academic verification would be the first step toward historical designation. But that means telling more people," Marcus pointed out. "Once word gets out, we lose control of the situation." "Maybe losing control isn't always bad," Emma said with 8-year-old wisdom. "Maybe some stories are too important to keep secret." Marcus looked at his daughter, continually amazed by her ability to cut through complex adult concerns to reach fundamental truths. The chamber had kept its secrets for nearly a century, but perhaps the time for secrecy had ended. "There's something else," Mrs. Patterson added, lowering her voice. "I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to represent the families of people who passed through Blackwood Station. Apparently, some families kept oral histories of their Underground Railroad experiences, and they've been searching for documentation to confirm their ancestors' stories." "You mean there are people alive today whose families were helped by Mr. Blackwood?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Quite possibly. Dr. Chen believes your discovery could help validate dozens of family histories that historians have never been able to confirm." It's not just about preserving the past, Marcus. It's about giving people their heritage back. Looking around the table at the maps, documents and quilt piece that represented layers of hidden history, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. His 50-cent purchase had made him guardian of more than just a building. He was protecting the memory of everyone who had risked everything for freedom. The development company could offer him financial security, but it couldn't offer him the chance to honor the courage of families who had trusted Theodore Blackwood with their lives. The knock on Marcus's apartment door came at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, when Emma was supposed to be safely in bed reading. Through the peephole, he saw two men in expensive suits who radiated the kind of polished intimidation that came with corporate legal departments. "Mr. Chen, I'm Richard Blackstone from Harrison Industries Legal Division. We'd like to discuss your Ridge Mountain property." Marcus opened the door, but didn't invite them in, keeping his body positioned to block their view of Emma's bedroom. "It's late for a business call. Business that affects your daughter's future shouldn't wait," the second man said, introducing himself as Marcus Vale, acquisition specialist. "May we come in?" Against his better judgment, Marcus stepped aside, but remained standing to signal this wouldn't be a lengthy conversation. The men settled on his small couch with the practiced ease of people accustomed to making themselves comfortable in situations where they weren't welcome. "We understand you've declined our generous purchase offer," Blackstone began, opening a leather portfolio. "We're prepared to increase that offer substantially." The new figure on the document he produced made Marcus's knees weak. It was enough money to secure Emma's college education, buy a house anywhere they wanted, and provide financial stability he'd never dreamed possible. "That's a very generous offer," Marcus managed. "But the property isn't for sale." Vale leaned forward with the predatory patience of someone who'd navigated many similar conversations. "Mr. Chen, we've done our research. You work 2 jobs to afford this apartment. Your daughter attends public school in a district with limited resources. You drive a 15-year-old car that needs major repairs." The casual invasion of his privacy sent anger flashing through Marcus's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. These men had obviously investigated every aspect of his life, looking for pressure points they could exploit. "Your property sits on mineral deposits worth hundreds of millions of dollars," Blackstone continued. "Harrison Industries will extract those minerals whether you cooperate or not. Eminent domain laws allow government seizure of private property for public economic benefit. Are you threatening me?" "We're offering you a choice," Vale replied smoothly. "Accept our offer and relocate comfortably, or fight us and ultimately lose everything while spending years in legal battles you can't afford." From her bedroom, Emma's voice called out, "Daddy, who's here?" Marcus's protective instinct sharpened at the sound of his daughter's innocent question. "Just some business people, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Emma appeared in the hallway anyway, rubbing sleepy eyes and wearing her favorite unicorn pajamas. Vale's expression shifted as he studied her with calculating interest. "Beautiful child," he commented, 8 years old. "That's such an important age for educational development. I imagine you want the best possible schools for her." The implied threat in his tone made Marcus step protectively closer to Emma. "I think this conversation is over." "Of course," Blackstone agreed, rising smoothly, "but consider this. We have a geological survey commissioned by the county that shows significant mineral deposits throughout the mountain range. That survey will be used to justify eminent domain proceedings within the next 60 days. He placed a business card on Marcus's coffee table along with the purchase offer. "Our offer expires Friday at 5 p.m. After that, you'll be dealing with government seizure and much less favorable compensation." After they left, Marcus double-checked his door locks and closed all the blinds, feeling violated by their casual intrusion into his home and implicit threats toward Emma. The purchase offer lay on his table like a poisonous snake, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Emma padded back to the living room in her bare feet, sensing the tension that lingered after the stranger's departure. "Were those bad men, Daddy?" "Not bad exactly, sweetheart. Just men who want something we have, and they're not very nice about asking for it. They want our mountain house." Marcus sat beside his daughter on the couch, pulling her close for the comfort they both needed. "They want to dig up the whole mountain, Em. If they do that, the secret chamber where families hid will be destroyed forever." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the serious consideration she gave to important problems. But those families were brave, and Mr. Blackwood was brave. We can't let their story disappear. Looking at his daughter's determined expression, Marcus felt his own resolve crystallizing. The men had made a crucial error in their intimidation tactics. They'd underestimated the power of an 8-year-old's sense of justice and her father's willingness to protect what she believed was right. The purchase offer might represent financial security, but some things were worth more than money. The stories preserved in that hidden chamber deserved protection, and the families who had risked everything for freedom deserved to be remembered. Dr. Chen arrived at the cabin on Friday morning with a team of graduate students and enough equipment to conduct a thorough archaeological survey. Marcus watched nervously as they unpacked cameras, measuring devices, and documentation materials, understanding that the next few hours would determine whether his discovery gained official protection or remained vulnerable to corporate acquisition. "This is remarkable preservation," Dr. Chen observed as Marcus led her through the hidden entrance to the chamber. "The dry mountain air and stable temperature have kept everything in extraordinary condition." Emma appointed herself as official tour guide, explaining their discoveries with 8-year-old enthusiasm, while Dr. Chen and her students documented every detail. The professor listened with growing excitement as Emma showed her the ledger, the letters, and the signal quilt piece Jake had contributed. "Emma, you and your father have uncovered something historically significant," Dr. Chen said, photographing a page from Blackwood's journal. "This documentation fills gaps in Underground Railroad research that historians have been trying to solve for decades." One of her graduate students, a young man named David, specialized in 19th-century communication systems. He examined the carved symbols above the chamber entrance with fascination. "These markings aren't random decorative elements. They're coded messages indicating this was an active station in a larger network." Dr. Chen spent considerable time studying the photograph of Blackwood's family, comparing facial features to other historical images she'd brought for reference. "I believe this confirms something we've suspected but never proven, that many Underground Railroad conductors had personal connections to the communities they served." "You mean Mr. Blackwood helped people who looked like his own family?" Emma asked. "Exactly. It makes his courage even more meaningful, because he understood personally what freedom meant to the families who passed through here." As the documentation process continued, Dr. Chen shared information that made Marcus realize the scope of their discovery extended far beyond what they'd imagined. "We've identified at least 3 other documented stations that reference a mountain sanctuary in their records. Your site appears to have been a crucial link in the western expansion of the Underground Railroad." Jake arrived at midday with unexpected news. Mrs. Patterson had received phone calls from 2 families whose oral histories included stories about a helpful station keeper in the Colorado mountains. Both families had preserved details passed down through generations about Theodore Blackwood's assistance to their ancestors. One caller was Maria Santos from Denver, Jake reported. Her great-great-grandmother was helped by Blackwood in 1923. The family has kept letters and documents from that time, including a hand-drawn map showing the location of the mountain station. Dr. Chen's team immediately contacted Maria Santos, arranging to examine her family's preserved documents. Within hours, she arrived at the cabin with a wooden box containing treasures that made the historical connection undeniable. "My bisabuela told stories about the mountain angel who saved her family," Maria explained, opening letters written in Spanish and English. She was traveling with 3 small children after her husband was killed for trying to organize workers in Texas. Blackwood hid them for 2 weeks until safe passage could be arranged to Denver. The letters Maria's great-great-grandmother had kept included detailed descriptions of the hidden chamber, mentions of other families who shared the refuge, and expressions of gratitude that brought tears to Emma's eyes as they were translated. She wrote that Mr. Blackwood never asked for payment, but she left him a quilt square as thanks. Maria continued, producing a piece of fabric that perfectly matched the signal quilt Jake had inherited from his grandfather. Dr. Chen photographed Maria's documents alongside the chamber artifacts, building a comprehensive record that would support historical designation. "With this level of documentation, I can recommend immediate protection under the National Historic Preservation Act. This site qualifies for the National Register of Historic Places." "What does that mean for the mining company?" Marcus asked, hope growing in his chest. It means they'll face significant legal challenges if they attempt to disturb the site, Dr. Chen explained. Historical designation doesn't make mining impossible, but it requires extensive environmental and cultural impact studies. The process typically takes years and often proves prohibitively expensive. Emma clapped her hands with delight. So the family's stories will be safe? More than safe, sweetheart. They'll be preserved and shared so other people can learn about the courage of families like Maria's ancestors. As Dr. Chen's team prepared their preliminary report, Marcus felt the weight of uncertainty lifting from his shoulders. The university's official documentation would provide legal protection against corporate pressure while ensuring that Blackwood's legacy received the recognition it deserved. Harrison Industries had underestimated the power of historical truth and community determination. They'd assumed that financial pressure alone could overcome Marcus's resistance, but they hadn't calculated the strength that came from protecting something larger than personal interests. The authentication documents Dr. Chen prepared would transform their 50-cent cabin from vulnerable property into protected historical site, giving Marcus the legal foundation he needed to resist corporate intimidation while honoring the courage of everyone who had risked everything for freedom. The confrontation Marcus had been dreading arrived on Monday morning in the form of 3 black SUVs parked at the base of the mountain trail. Harrison Industries had brought an army lawyers, surveyors, security personnel, and executives who radiated the kind of corporate power that usually crushed individual resistance without breaking stride. Marcus and Emma arrived to find the trail blocked by men in expensive suits who examined them with predatory interest. Richard Blackstone stepped forward with the confident smile of someone who believed victory was inevitable. Mr. Chen, I trust you've had time to reconsider our generous offer. Today's deadline makes this your final opportunity to negotiate favorably. The property isn't for sale, Marcus replied, keeping Emma close beside him, and it's now protected under federal historic preservation laws. Blackstone's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened with calculation. We're aware of your university friend's preliminary report. Unfortunately, preliminary documentation carries no legal weight against established mineral rights that predate your purchase. He signaled to one of his assistants, who produced a folder thick with legal documents. Harrison Industries purchased mineral extraction rights to this entire mountain range in 1987. Your surface ownership doesn't supersede our subsurface claims. Marcus felt his confidence faltering as he scanned the documents. The legal language was complex, but the implications seemed clear. The mining company had legitimate claims that might override historical protection. Furthermore, Blackstone continued, our geological surveys indicate unstable ground conditions that pose significant safety risks. The county has been advised to condemn the property as unsafe for habitation. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve, whispering urgently, Daddy, look at the cabin. Someone's already there. Marcus followed her gaze up the mountain trail to see additional corporate personnel examining his property without permission. Anger flashed through his chest at the violation of his home, but Blackstone spoke before he could protest. Our safety inspection team is documenting structural hazards that endanger your daughter's welfare. Child Protective Services have been notified of the unsafe living conditions. The threat to Emma's custody sent ice through Marcus's veins. These people had weaponized every aspect of his life, turning his love for his daughter into leverage for their corporate agenda. You can't take my daughter, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled fury. We're not taking anyone, Blackstone replied smoothly. We're simply ensuring that responsible authorities are aware of potential dangers. A caring father would prioritize his child's safety over sentimental attachment to dangerous property. Jake's pickup truck appeared on the trail behind them, followed by Mrs. Patterson's sedan and 2 other vehicles Marcus didn't recognize. His community support network had arrived, and their presence changed the dynamics of the confrontation immediately. Dr. Chen emerged from one of the vehicles with Maria Santos and an elderly African-American man who carried himself with quiet dignity. Behind them came a woman with a professional camera and a young man with recording equipment, journalists who'd been contacted about the historical discovery. Mr. Blackstone, Dr. Chen called as she approached the group. I'm surprised to find you conducting unauthorized inspections of a protected historical site. No protection has been legally established, Blackstone replied, though his confident tone carried new uncertainty. Actually, federal law provides automatic interim protection for sites under National Register evaluation, Dr. Chen countered. Your presence here without proper permits violates several preservation statutes. The elderly man stepped forward, introducing himself with formal courtesy that carried unmistakable authority. I'm Judge William Freeman, retired from the federal bench but still quite familiar with preservation law. Dr. Chen contacted me about this remarkable discovery. Marcus watched Blackstone's expression shift as he realized the situation had grown beyond simple corporate intimidation. A federal judge, even retired, commanded respect that corporate legal teams couldn't easily dismiss. This site connects to my family's history, Judge Freeman continued, his voice carrying the weight of personal significance. My great-grandfather passed through Theodore Blackwood's station in 1923. Our family has preserved his journal from that journey, including detailed descriptions of this location. He produced a leather-bound book that made Marcus's breath catch, another journal, written from the perspective of the families Blackwood had helped. The document provided external corroboration of everything they'd discovered in the hidden chamber. Emma looked up at Judge Freeman with wide eyes. Your great-grandfather was one of the brave families Mr. Blackwood helped. Indeed he was, young lady. And his courage in seeking freedom led to opportunities that eventually allowed his great-grandson to become a federal judge. Stories like that deserve protection. The journalist stepped forward, introducing herself as Rebecca Walsh from the Denver Post. Mr. Blackstone, would Harrison Industries like to comment on your attempts to destroy a documented underground railroad site for mining profits? Marcus watched corporate confidence crumble as Blackstone realized their intimidation tactics had become a public relations nightmare. Fighting an individual family was one thing. Battling federal judges, university historians, and investigative journalists was entirely different. We'll be reviewing our legal options, Blackstone said stiffly, signaling his team to withdraw. As the corporate convoy retreated down the mountain, Marcus felt Emma's hand slip into his. The final confrontation had ended, not with violence or legal maneuvering, but with the power of community and the weight of historical truth. 6 months after the confrontation with Harrison Industries, Marcus stood in the restored cabin, watching Emma carefully write the first entry in their new visitor logbook. The leather-bound journal, crafted by a local artisan to match Blackwood's original, would document everyone who came to learn about the Underground Railroad station they now officially called the Blackwood Freedom Sanctuary. Today, Mrs. Johnson's third-grade class visited our mountain. Emma wrote in careful cursive, 22 students learned about brave families who traveled to freedom. Tommy asked if the families were scared. I told him yes, but they were brave anyway. The transformation of their property had been remarkable. Federal preservation grants, university partnerships, and community fundraising had provided resources to restore the cabin to its 1920s appearance while adding modern safety features and educational facilities. The hidden chamber remained exactly as they'd found it, but now featured climate control and lighting that allowed visitors to experience the space safely. Marcus had discovered a talent for historical interpretation that surprised him. His new role as site curator provided steady income while allowing him to share stories that brought the past to life for school groups, historians, and families researching their ancestry. The work felt meaningful in ways his warehouse job never had. Daddy, the Peterson family is here for their appointment, Emma announced, looking up from the visitor log. She'd become an enthusiastic junior tour guide, helping visitors understand the site's significance through her 8-year-old perspective that made history feel immediate and real. The Petersons had driven from Kansas after learning that their great-great-grandmother might have passed through Blackwood Station. Mrs. Peterson carried a shoebox filled with family documents, photographs, and heirloom jewelry that her ancestor had somehow preserved during her journey to freedom. Our family story says great-great-grandmama Susan was helped by a mountain man who risked his life for strangers, Mrs. Peterson explained as Marcus led them toward the chamber entrance. We've always wondered if it was true. In the hidden chamber, Mrs. Peterson opened her shoebox with trembling hands. Among the preserved items was a brass button that perfectly matched one they'd found in the supply alcove, and a letter fragment that mentioned the kind station keeper who shares his bread with hungry children. Emma watched with fascination as Mrs. Peterson compared her family's preserved items to artifacts in the chamber. "Your great-great-grandmama was really here," she announced with authority. "Mr. Blackwood helped her, just like your family remembered." The connection between past and present moved Mrs. Peterson to tears. "For 4 generations, our family has told Susan's story. Having proof that it really happened means everything." Marcus added the Peterson family's visit to his research files, part of an ongoing project to identify and connect with as many descendant families as possible. Dr. Chen's university team had documented over 40 families whose oral histories mentioned Blackwood Station, creating a network of modern connections to the historical sanctuary. Jake had become the site's unofficial maintenance supervisor, his construction expertise ensuring that increased visitor traffic didn't damage the fragile historical structures. His grandfather's tools now hung in a place of honor in the cabin's main room, representing the local community's connection to the site's preservation. "You know what I love most about this place?" Emma asked that evening as they walked around the property during their daily inspection routine. "It's that the brave family's stories aren't secret anymore. Now everyone can know how courageous they were." Marcus nodded, understanding that Emma had grasped something profound about the transformation they'd helped facilitate. The Underground Railroad had necessarily operated in secret, with participants risking everything to protect activities that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. But now, in safety and freedom, those same stories could be celebrated and honored. The visitor logbook Emma maintained had become a treasured record of the site's impact. Teachers wrote about students gaining new understanding of American history. Families documented emotional connections to ancestors' experiences. Historians noted research breakthroughs enabled by the site's preserved documentation. "Tomorrow we have that big group from Denver University," Marcus reminded Emma as they secured the cabin for the night. "Graduate students studying 19th century social movements. I'll tell them about how families helped each other even when it was dangerous," Emma replied seriously, "and how one person with courage can change lots of lives." Looking at his daughter's earnest expression, Marcus marveled at how their 50-cent investment had educated her about values that couldn't be taught through textbooks alone. She'd learned firsthand that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose principle over comfort, community over isolation. The Blackwood Freedom Sanctuary had become more than a historical site. It was a place where past courage inspired present understanding, where stories of freedom continued to shape new generations who would carry those lessons into an uncertain future. 1 year after their first discovery, the Blackwood Freedom Sanctuary officially opened as a National Historic Site with a dedication ceremony that brought together historians, government officials, descendant families, and community members who had supported the preservation effort. Marcus stood before the gathered crowd, feeling simultaneously proud and humbled by the transformation their 50-cent purchase had undergone. 14 months ago, my daughter Emma and I thought we were buying a fixer-upper cabin. Marcus began his dedication speech. We never imagined we were becoming guardians of stories that would change our understanding of courage, community, and the price of freedom. Emma sat in the front row between Judge Freeman and Maria Santos, wearing her best dress and the serious expression she reserved for important occasions. In her lap, she held the original visitor logbook they'd started, now full of signatures and comments from hundreds of people who'd been touched by Blackwood's legacy. Behind the podium, a bronze plaque bore the dedication text Emma had helped compose. "In memory of Theodore Blackwood and all who risked everything to guide others toward freedom. Their courage reminds us that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they choose justice over comfort." Dr. Chen presented the formal documentation that established the site's permanent protection under federal law, ensuring that no future development could threaten the preserved Underground Railroad station. The university had committed to ongoing research and educational programming that would keep Blackwood's story alive for future generations. "This site represents more than historical preservation," Dr. Chen told the audience. "It demonstrates the power of community action and individual determination to protect heritage that belongs to all Americans." The ceremony included readings from Blackwood's journal and letters from families who'd found refuge in the hidden chamber. Judge Freeman read from his great-grandfather's account of their stay at the mountain sanctuary, his voice carrying the emotional weight of personal connection to the history they were celebrating. My great-grandfather wrote that Theodore Blackwood never spoke of the dangers he faced or the sacrifices he made, Judge Freeman shared. He simply did what needed to be done, one family at a time, trusting that small acts of courage could contribute to larger movements toward justice. Maria Santos presented a quilt created by descendant families, each square representing a different family story connected to Blackwood Station. The collaborative artwork would hang permanently in the cabin's main room, a colorful testament to the diverse communities that had found sanctuary in this remote mountain location. The State Historical Society announced plans for a companion visitor center that would provide additional educational facilities while preserving the intimate scale of the original cabin. Interactive exhibits would allow visitors to experience Underground Railroad journeys through multimedia presentations that brought historical accounts to life. Local officials who had initially questioned Marcus's restoration project now praised the economic benefits the historical site brought to their rural community. Hotels, restaurants, and other businesses had seen increased revenue from the steady stream of visitors the sanctuary attracted. Tourism that educated while it entertained created sustainable economic development that honored rather than exploited local heritage. The Blackwood Freedom Sanctuary proves that historical preservation and economic development can work together, the county commissioner noted in his remarks. Protecting our heritage creates opportunities that benefit everyone. Emma's turn at the podium drew the day's warmest applause. She'd insisted on speaking despite her nervousness about addressing such a large crowd, determined to represent the perspective of young people who would inherit the responsibility for preserving these stories. When my daddy bought our mountain house for 50 cents, people thought he was crazy, Emma began, her young voice carrying clearly across the crowd. But sometimes being a little crazy is what it takes to do something important. Mr. Blackwood was probably crazy too, helping families when it was dangerous, but his crazy courage saved lots of people. She paused to look at the bronze plaque, gathering courage for her closing words. I learned that brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. Brave people are the ones who do the right thing, even when they are scared. Every person who comes to our sanctuary can learn about being that kind of brave. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the sanctuary's new entrance sign, carved from local stone and designed to blend naturally with the mountain environment. The sign featured the star pattern from the Underground Railroad signal quilts, ensuring that even visitors unfamiliar with the site's history would understand its connection to freedom and courage. As the crowd dispersed and families began exploring the newly opened educational exhibits, Marcus felt the profound satisfaction that comes from seeing a vision fully realized. The cabin he'd purchased in desperation had become a beacon of hope and education, ensuring that Theodore Blackwood's courage would inspire new generations of people committed to justice and human dignity. The bronze plaque would weather many seasons, but the stories it commemorated would endure far longer than any monument could preserve them. 2 years had passed since that first desperate hike up the mountain trail, and Marcus could barely recognize the anxious, financially struggling man he'd been. Standing on the cabin's restored porch, watching Emma lead a group of visiting students through the sanctuary grounds, he marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed by a 50-cent decision. The property now buzzed with purposeful activity.